Konnichiwa mina, and here is week 3 of the 2017 PFA season, the week of September 3rd to 4th, the first week of September in the PFA. So let's look at the results from last week, as here's the standings for week 2, and Manhattan leads Cleveland in the tiebreaker in the National East, and Omaha has the one-game lead over Denver in the National Central. Jacksonville has the tiebreaker over Birmingham in the National South, and Phoenix has the one-game lead over Los Angeles in the National West. In the Century East, Pittsburgh has the tiebreaker over Baltimore, Buffalo, and Cincinnati. Cincinnati. Detroit has a tiebreaker over Chicago and Oklahoma in the Century Central. Miami has a tiebreaker over Orlando in the Century South, and Seattle has the tiebreaker over Las Vegas, San Francisco, and El Paso in the Century West. And here is the schedule, of course, for Week 3, as we're going to get things started with Portland going to Atlanta. And remember, the winning percentages is the odds of winning, and the side it's on is for that team. So Los Angeles at Birmingham. Birmingham has an 85% chance of winning. And then we're going to get our first division showdown, Pittsburgh at Buffalo. And then Seattle at Cincinnati. That'll be kind of interesting. That could be a defensive game. Milwaukee going to Cleveland. Tampa going to Columbus. One of those teams is going to get their first win. New Orleans at Dallas, a division showdown from last year. Orlando at Detroit, battle between undefeated. That's going to be very interesting. Oklahoma at Houston. Washington at Omaha in this National Conference rematch. Not National Conference Championship rematch. And the final 1 p.m. game, Boston at San Antonio. Then we go to the 4 p.m. games with Phoenix going to Hawaii, as they're going to make their home debut this year. San Diego going to Las Vegas. Philadelphia going to Manhattan. Louisville going to Oakland, which is one of those teams is going to get their first win. And Kansas City going to San Francisco. And then we get to Sunday night with Denver going to Indianapolis, another division showdown. And then the big Monday night showdown that we've been waiting for, the matchup between the Century Conference wildcard teams, Baltimore at Miami. I can't wait for that. So now let's get to the Week 3's games. So we start this week off with an offensive juggernaut. This is probably going to be as the Portland Dragons visit the Atlanta Trojans. And I believe the first time they've ever played against each other in the Georgia Dome. Oh boy, I can't wait to see the offense they get this week. And Atlanta would win 46-35, as that was 81 points, making it the second highest scoring game in PFA history, just 1 point short of tying the record, which I believe was San Francisco at Buffalo last November, 44-38, which was 82 points. And man, Atlanta's Cody Perry, 21 of 31, 383 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He's tied his record he set last week for the most touchdowns in a game, which is second overall now. And he had the fifth most yards in a game. He's setting so many records. He's already thrown 15 touchdowns this year. And he's on track. If he keeps his yards up at 343 average, he'll have over 6,100 yards and be the first QB in PFA history to throw over 5,000 yards and the first player in football history to throw over 6,000, at least that I know of in American football. And the Portland's quarterback, Frederick Van Dyke, still struggling a bit. 319 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks, along with being 19 of 28. And Atlanta's wide receiver, Joseph Eames, had 3 receptions, 168 yards, and 2 touchdowns, which also makes him give him the third most receiving yards in a game, since he just had the second most last week. And of course, 4 wide receivers this week had 100 yards in this game. Portland's linebacker Zachary Woods had 15 tackles and 2 forced fumbles. So what a great game for Atlanta. Kind of a disappointing start for Portland. They got to get that defense fixed up. They remind me a lot of Atlanta last year. Then we head out west for a matchup between 2 division winners from last year, as it is the Los Angeles Angels visiting the Birmingham Hornets, as this is going to be quite an interesting game unless Birmingham's defense destroys Los Angeles, as they did, as they won 27-7. And of course, remember, Marcus Thompson, their starting quarterback for Birmingham, was out for the next week. So Ollie Burke, their first round pick this year, made his first start, and he was 17 of 28, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 picks. He did not really do good, but hey, he got them those 2 touchdowns all they need. As Los Angeles quarterback Maurice Green was terrible, 20 of 37, 171 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 picks. They forced him hard in that game. Los Angeles linebacker Julius Searcy, 12 tackles. Birmingham's quarterback Jacob Taylor had 5 tackles and 2 picks, along with a 79 punt return for a touchdown. 9 sacks by Birmingham, as they have a win number 10, which is now officially the second longest winning streak in PFA history, behind Omaha's last year's 14-win streak. And I thought of it now. I think I thought of a brand new nickname for the Birmingham's defense, and I want to hear what you all got to say about it. I think I'm going to call it Sack and Sting, which my mother thought of earlier this morning. Then we go back up to Buffalo, as we got our division showdown, Pittsburgh at Buffalo. As remember, these two get shown week 1 with Pittsburgh getting that win, and whoever wins this game will have the lead in the Century East. It would take OT, but Pittsburgh would get it 27-21, as their both quarterbacks, Cruz Tolbert and Ricky Bale, did not do good at all, as their Pittsburgh running back Frederick Robinson had 30 carries for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their wide receiver Gary Berry had 4 receptions for 102 yards. Their linebacker Charlie Weber had another good day, 11 tackles and 2 sacks. Buffalo's strong safety Nanfiel Parker had 7 tackles and a pick 6 too, and this will be Pittsburgh's first sweep of Buffalo, as Pittsburgh now has the lead in the Century East. Then we go down south to Cincinnati, as we got a matchup from last year as Seattle visits Cincinnati. Remember, these two went against each other last year, and they both beat each other at their place. Remember, Cincinnati destroyed Seattle at the end of the year. And of course, remember, these two really seem to have a good defense going, so this could be a defensive struggle. Seattle would get the costly victory, 17-12, as their quarterback Ken Rodriguez was 2 of 6 for 42 yards before he was knocked out with a torn hamstring. He's going to be out the next 12 to 16 weeks, as their first round pick QB Jody Tucker was 10 of 22 for 121 yards and a touchdown. He's going to make his first start next week, as Cincinnati's wide receiver John Griffith had 4 receptions for 120 yards, and Seattle's linebacker James Torres had 12 tackles. So Seattle's defense helped them get the win there, but they're going to need to rely on their rookie QB now for a long time now. And maybe by the time Ken Rodriguez comes back, maybe Jody Tucker will be good enough to maybe finally cement the starter for the long term. Then we go up north to Cleveland, as the Cleveland Bulldogs host the Milwaukee Lakers, who are still struggling without their starting quarterback, as John Addison, that really good backup last year, is doing terrible this season so far. Milwaukee would score first, but they would lose 35-7, as Cleveland's looking really good right now so far, as their quarterback Scott Hernandez was 21 of 30 for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. And John Addison, the quarterback for Milwaukee, he had another 3-pick day, so yeah, he's definitely not doing good this season. Their running back Steven Salisbury had 28 attempts, 102 yards, and Gerald Todd, the wide receiver for Cleveland, had 7 receptions, 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Milwaukee linebacker Richard Herron had 11 tackles and 2 sacks, and Cleveland's linebacker Dominic Gross had 11 tackles. So another dominant day for Cleveland as Milwaukee continues to regress. Then we stay in Ohio for our third Ohioan team hosting their game, as the Columbus Barons host Tampa, as both teams trying to get their first win of the year. Tampa would dominate 33-17 as they scored 26 unanswered points for the rest of the game. Tampa quarterback Robert Richardson had a record-setting day, 26 of 37, 410 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is now the record for the most yards in a game, and only the second time ever in PFA history someone threw over 400 yards. He had a good day. Columbus's wide receiver Jermaine McNair had 4 receptions, 110 yards and a touchdown. Tampa's wide receiver Edward Robertson had 5 receptions, 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. Columbus's linebacker William LaFleur had 13 tackles and a sack, and Tampa's defensive end Robert Haskins had 8 tackles and 3 sacks. So Tampa got their first win, whilst Columbus is still looking for their first for the year. Then we go down south to Dallas for a Century South Division showdown as New Orleans visits Dallas. Remember, these two fought hard for each early on the season for the Century South title until Miami started to come in, and they both beat each other at their place. So let's see if Dallas can get their first win against New Orleans in Dallas. And Dallas would get the win 23-6, as quarterback Troy Hill would be 25 of 35 for 217 yards and a touchdown. New Orleans quarterback James Williams, who we thought was doubtful for the game, managed to start as he was 17 of 29 for 148 yards. New Orleans linebacker Jeremy Cornell had 16 tackles, and their cornerback Michael Ingles had 12 tackles. Dallas's defensive tackle Forrest Barnes had 10 tackles, and Dallas's linebacker Victor Shores had 10 tackles. So Dallas got their first win over New Orleans and Dallas, as they got a big victory needed to keep up with Miami and Orlando. Then we go up north to Detroit for a very important Century Conference matchup, as it's a rematch too from last year, as Orlando visits Detroit. As remember, these two visited their first ever game last year, with Orlando taking multiple 10-point leads until Detroit came back to win it. Let's see what happens this time around. Orlando would get their revenge as they win 26-21 to go 3-0 for the first time ever, as their quarterback Milton Hester did a lot better this week, 21 of 23 for 292 yards and 2 touchdowns. Detroit's quarterback Charles Cunningham was 12 of 24, still can't get like over half percentage, but he had 270 yards and 2 touchdowns, so he's still getting a lot of touchdowns though, thankfully, for his saving grace. Orlando's running back Frank Evans had 28 attempts, 116 yards and a touchdown, and their wide receiver Jonathan Swanson had 136 yards and a touchdown. Detroit's wide receiver Joseph Chavez had 5 receptions, 105 yards and 2 touchdowns, and their linebacker Robert Bryson had 13 tackles. So a tough game for both teams, but in the end Detroit just couldn't pull it off, as they're going to go to Orlando next week. We go back down south in Texas, as it's now the Oklahoma Oilers visiting the Houston Twisters, as they both played their first game, one game already, and let's see if Oklahoma can get another win, or Houston can get their first win for the year. Oklahoma would dominate Houston 34-13, as their backup quarterback Wiley Chester in his first game after for a long time was 26 of 35, 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. As Houston's wide receiver Robert Brown had 3 receptions, 147 yards and a touchdown, and their linebacker Juan McKnight had 13 tackles and a sack. So while Wiley Chester had a really good game, it's going to really open up that quarterback controversy with him and Peter Rose, as he'll be coming back very soon. So that's going to be a very interesting situation down in Oklahoma. Then we go up north a bit to Omaha, as we get our National Conference rematch, as the Washington Americans visit the Omaha Thunder. It's not so far the number 1 defense for Washington or the number 1 offense in Omaha, so this would be kind of interesting to see what's going to happen here. Washington would get their revenge 27-13 in a dominant fourth quarter, although the game was tied up until then, as Washington's quarterback Roy Rice had his first solid game of the year, 20 of 30 for 181 yards and a touchdown. Omaha's quarterback Archie Marvin was 26 of 36 for 270 yards, held to 1 touchdown. They forced a pick on him, as Omaha's running back Mark Metz had 30 carries for 104 yards. Their wide receiver Stephen Carmona had 8 receptions for 109 yards. And Washington's defensive end Ira Washington had 12 tackles and 3 sacks. So good job on Washington getting their revenge and winning 2 in a row, as Omaha got their first loss to the champion, as they got to go to that Memorial Stadium a little bit south of Omaha for their next Sunday night game, like hosting Los Angeles. Then we go back south to Texas, as it's now Boston at San Antonio, matchup between 2 second-place teams in the National Conference, as Boston's trying to get their season up right, and San Antonio's trying to keep up with Jacksonville, Atlanta, and Birmingham in this National South. San Antonio would bust up Boston as they won 48-20, as San Antonio's quarterback Glenn Cheng was 22 of 32, 340 yards, and 5 touchdowns, which is the 7th most all-time in a game. Boston's quarterback Sterling Osborne, who was able to come back from an injury, was 19 of 37 for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns, but it wasn't enough, as San Antonio's wide receivers Leon Thomas had 7 receptions, 114 yards, and a touchdown, and their Deion Gardner had 5 receptions, 113 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and Boston's free safety Patrick Robinson had 12 tackles and a forced fumble. Then we finally go out to Honolulu for the very first game of the season, Hawaii, as the Phoenix Storm visit the Hawaii Phantoms in a matchup with the National West on the line. Remember, Phoenix beat Hawaii last year in the last-second field goal on Sunday night. Let's see what happens this time around. Hawaii would dominate in the fourth quarter, as they would win 33-18, as their quarterback Richard Clough was 21 of 33 for 283 yards and a touchdown. James Cruz, quarterback for Phoenix, was 19 of 31, 212 yards and a touchdown. Phoenix's running back David Sexton had 31 carries for 115 yards, and Hawaii's linebacker Wilson Sharp had 13 tackles and a sack. So Hawaii has won this one round, so now they got the lead in the National West for the moment. After that, we go back to the continent, as we're out in Las Vegas, as the Gamblers host San Diego, as San Diego is trying to get their first win, as Las Vegas is trying to keep the lead against Seattle and San Francisco and El Paso in the Century West. And Las Vegas would win 34-20, as they held down San Diego pretty good, but unfortunately, Calvin Belcher, their quarterback, who was 0-2, was knocked out with a concussion. He's going to miss the next 2 weeks, as his backup, Quinton Aranda, was 10 of 16, 218 yards and 3 touchdowns, so he really got that offense moving, as their wide receiver John Maxwell had 3 receptions for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. San Diego's wide receiver David Seton had 6 receptions for 124 yards. Las Vegas strong safety Chris Dallas had 11 tackles. Their linebacker Rodney Naraves had 10 tackles, and their cornerback Mike Franklin had 6 tackles and 2 picks, as San Diego still remains winless. Then we go back out east, as is another Eastern National Conference National East showdown, as the Philadelphia Hawks visits Manhattan Greens. Remember, these two have some of the highest scoring games in PFA history, and when they visited each other last year, the visiting team had won that game, so we'll see what happens here, as Manhattan's trying to keep the lead against Cleveland. And Manhattan will start the year 3-0 as they beat Philadelphia 28-17 to win 2 in a row against them, as Jamie Norwood was 22 of 35 for 311 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had a very offensive day, as their wide receiver David Neto, 7 receptions, 144 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Lawrence Irons, 5 receptions for 107 yards. But Philadelphia's quarterbacks were busy too, as Brian Coombs had 8 receptions for 128 yards and a touchdown, and Everett Shapiro had 5 receptions, 105 yards and a touchdown, as Philadelphia falls to 1-2, and Manhattan keeps up with Cleveland for the National East. Then we go back out west to Oakland, as it's going to be another rematch from games last year, as the winless Louisville will visit the winless Oakland. Remember, Oakland gave Louisville their first win ever last year, so let's see what happens here between two terrible offenses but solid, or in case of Oakland's really good defense. Will Louisville finally get a point this year too? And the answer is no, as Oakland will win 17-0, as Reuben Williams was 16 of 27 for 136 yards, and Louisville's quarterback Stanford Fink, remember, number 1 overall pick, was 15 of 31 for 144 yards. Still hasn't thrown a pick, but he hasn't thrown a touchdown either, so that's not good. Louisville's linebacker Larry Mercier had 17 tackles and 2 forced fumbles, and Oakland's safety Willis Little had 7 tackles and 4 sacks. So, once again, Louisville has not scored a single point yet this year. This is like one of the worst offenses I've ever seen. But the only reason I said they're not like probably the worst team yet is because their defense is still doing an okay job. Then we go down south a bit to Santa Clara, as the Kansas City Hammerheads visit the San Francisco Union, and another important matchup between two Central Conference teams, as both of them are trying to get to 2-1 to compete in their division. San Francisco would get back over 500 as they win 31-16, as John Getz was 16 of 27 for 224 yards and a touchdown. Kansas City's quarterback Henry Settles was 16 of 33 for 232 yards. San Francisco's running back Anthony Marks had 28 carries, 165 yards, and 3 touchdowns, which is the 3rd most rushing yards in a game and the 7th most rushing touchdowns in a game. He had a very good, incredible day. Kansas City's defensive end Otis Linder had 10 tackles and 2 sacks, and San Francisco's defensive end Charles Magnusa had 10 tackles, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble. So what a great day San Francisco has as Kansas City falls to 1-2. Then it's the big National Central showdown on Sunday night, as Denver visits Indianapolis in a rematch from last year's Sunday night game. Remember, Denver had a 23-10 lead going into halftime, and Indianapolis came back to win it 24-23. How will it go this time around? Denver would blow it again as Indianapolis would win 19-10, Same thing like last time. Denver had a 10-6 lead going into halftime, and they blew it, allowing Indianapolis to score 13 unanswered points to win it as they fall to 1-2 and third place in the National Central, as Indianapolis quarterback Rodney Sanders was 12 of 19 for 188 yards and a touchdown. Denver's quarterback Zachary Ellis was 19 of 28 for 258 yards. Indianapolis wide receiver Sol Harmon had 7 receptions for 115 yards. Denver's defensive end Craig Early had 10 tackles and 4 sacks and 3 fumble recoveries by Indianapolis, so their defense played a lot better this week compared to last week when they hosted Atlanta. So a big win for Indianapolis. And then it's the final big game of the week and the big Monday night showdown, as it is Baltimore visiting Miami, the two Century Conference wildcard teams last year, and 2 teams that I think are going to be contenders for PFA Bowl 2 and on the Century Conference side, and they're going to go at right hand in the air. This is a very important game for Baltimore and also a very important game for Miami. Miami would get it 23-17 as Baltimore tried to make a comeback in the fourth quarter, but they couldn't get it going, as Miami's quarterback Anthony McCormick was 15 of 28 for 220 yards, a touchdown and a pick, as Baltimore's defense did a good job on him. Baltimore's quarterback Andrew Lazard had his best game of the year so far, 29 of 36 for 303 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Baltimore's wide receiver Ariel Leary had 8 receptions, 120 yards and a touchdown. Miami's wide receiver Edward Miller had 5 receptions, 119 yards and a touchdown. And Miami's linebacker Norman Crittenden had 10 tackles. So Miami has now won 7 in a row, as Baltimore's lost 2 in a row, and now back deeply in the back of the Century East, unfortunately for them. That was a disappointing loss for them, especially that loss against Buffalo last week. And with that, week 3 is in the books, as here is the standings in PFA after 3 weeks. In the National East, Manhattan has the tiebreaker over Cleveland in the National East. Omaha has the 1.5 game lead over Indianapolis in the National Central. Birmingham has the tiebreaker over Jacksonville in the National South. Hawaii has the tiebreaker over Phoenix in this National West. Pittsburgh has the 1 game lead over Baltimore in the Century East. Chicago has the tie over Oklahoma in the Century Central. Miami has the tiebreaker over Orlando in the Century South. And Seattle has the tiebreaker over San Francisco and Las Vegas in the Century West. As we have 8 undefeated teams left and 9 winless teams left. I wonder how many we're going to have at the end of week 4. Then we go to the playoff bracket right now in the National Conference. As if the season ended today, it would be Manhattan and Birmingham with the byes, with Jacksonville going to Hawaii and Cleveland going to Omaha. And then we go over to the Century Conference, as if the season ended today, it would be Miami and Chicago with the byes. It would be Oklahoma going to Las Vegas and Orlando going to Pittsburgh. So Omaha and Chicago, for being PFA Bowl 1 teams, still would be in the playoffs after 3 weeks. So far they're doing okay from their possible hangovers. So then we go take a look at the schedule for week 4 as 1 p.m. games. Pittsburgh at New Orleans, Seattle at Oklahoma, Detroit at Orlando, a rematch from this week. Washington going to Philadelphia, their first time they're playing a home game this year. Manhattan at Tampa, their first road game this year. Kansas City at Baltimore. Atlanta at Birmingham, that's going to be sick. Like one of the best offenses against one of the best defenses. Minneapolis going to Buffalo. Cincinnati going to Houston. And Milwaukee going to Louisville. Which, if I'm correct, this will be Louisville's first... No, not their first home game, their second home game. And in the 4 p.m. game, San Antonio going to Denver. Jacksonville going to Hawaii, that could be interesting. Phoenix going to Oakland. Dallas going to Portland. Chicago going to San Diego. And El Paso going to San Francisco. And then the big Sunday night game, Los Angeles at Omaha. Which, remember, it's not going to be at TD Ameritrade Park. It's going to be at Memorial Stadium, which is like a 40-something minutes away from Omaha. So check that out later on this season. And then finally, the Monday night game, Boston going to Cleveland. Man, I can't wait for week 4. However, unfortunately, I think I'm going to take a little break from PFA right now to get back to work on UFL. But hopefully soon, week 4 will be coming. So see you then for week 4 of the 2017 PFA season.